Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NYMER's Playground Maintenance and Inspection webinar. I'm Dave Bloodgood, Risk Control Manager for NYMER. And we're in that point during the year, the spring, and fortunately emerging from the worst of the COVID era, if you will. The last year was really an altered landscape for many people, certainly with respect to your playgrounds, your recreation programs. It was a real different year. And this year, we're looking forward to many of you engaged in a more normalized set of programs that you're offering to your respective constituents and the kids and all. And so right now, we want to get you off on the right foot by talking a little bit about getting your playgrounds in shape and how to maintain them properly and document those efforts. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. This webinar is being recorded. So for those who may not have been able to attend today, we are going to post it on NYMER's website. It'll be a couple of weeks out before we're able to do that. We're changing over platforms for that library of recorded webinars right now. But it will be available, and we are very likely to repeat this live at a later date. We also will be doing a recreation liability webinar for a broader scope of programs, and that'll go into your summer programs, background checks, all that sort of thing. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about some safety components related to playgrounds. When you install a playground, naturally, you want to have a good plan for how it's laid out. The spacing between equipment, the types of equipment, the surfacing, all of those sort of things should be detailed on that plan. And when it's being installed, the ideal is to have a certified vendor, the manufacturer in most cases, do the installation. However, it's very, very common to have a cadre of volunteers from your community to do the installation of the playground under the supervision of a certified playground installer. That is often a representative of the manufacturer or a designated vendor contractor that they've employed in the past and know the work is good. And so it all has to be done to conform with the regulations under the supervision of either the manufacturer or a certified installer. The other components in an ongoing basis are maintenance and inspection, and we'll get into supervision. It's not so much an issue for municipalities as it is for school districts, of course. But during your summer programs, it does become an issue, so we'll address that. A lot of kids get hurt on playgrounds, and the reason is that if playgrounds weren't challenging and demanding of a child in terms of exercising the skills they're developing physically, judgmentally, then they would be boring places, frankly, and the kids wouldn't be interested in using them. They wouldn't have the benefits of skill development and being able to test themselves out and the social aspect, of course. But as kids get injured, most are injured on public playgrounds, so 51% on public playgrounds. Now, of course, municipalities are public playgrounds, but that number is really mostly school playgrounds. Those are heavily used every day. They do have supervision, but just by virtue of the number of kids that are using them, kids get hurt more frequently on those playgrounds. I will say too, though, that school playgrounds are rigorously maintained. They replace equipment with greater regularity in most cases. And so, sometimes those injuries happen as a result of outdated equipment, poor surfacing, those type of reasons that we see when we're out in the field. Home playgrounds, kids get hurt on. When somebody puts a playground up in their backyard, a lot of times they're not aware of the kind of safety precautions that should be taken. For instance, surfacing underneath the playground and all that. A lot of kids, you don't know that they're injured on the playground. So, there's many that are not recorded. So in the 5 to 12 year age group, most kids that are injured, a little over half are girls, and boys perhaps a little less frequently. 15% of injuries are severe. So a severe injury might be comprised of a long bone injury, where you have a break in an arm or a leg. 3% require overnight hospitalization. The severe injuries that we're most concerned about, of course, are head trauma. And that's where the importance of good protective surfacing underneath the equipment comes into play. So causes of injury, use and supervision. Use, obviously, if the kids weren't using it, they wouldn't get hurt. Supervision, that again, that's more of an issue with schools. Schools have supervised playgrounds. Most municipalities do not outside of their summer program. Poor maintenance, however, is a significant contributor to injury. So if a chain breaks or is worn and has possibility of breaking, if equipment is fatigued because of a long duration of exposure to sunlight and it's not really looked after and replaced, things like that can contribute. And we'll see an awful lot of examples in photos later on. Improper equipment. Kids are only able to navigate equipment that is designed for them. So if a very young child is trying to access equipment because they see their older brother or sister do it and it looks like so much fun, they're smaller and they might fall from a greater height and therefore have a greater percentage chance of injuring themselves. Poor installation and layout is less. These days, there are strict guidelines that the manufacturers and installers observe in terms of the distance between equipment, which is really quite important, and we'll go into some of that. So the law overview for New York State. The law was based on the Consumer Product Safety Commission's Playground Safety Handbook, which is on the CPSC's website. You can download a copy of it. We can send you a copy of it. My email is going to be at the end of this presentation, and I'll entertain any kind of questions at that time too. Feel free to contact me after this is over. So, included in the law are specifications about the playground equipment's design, the kind of signage that you should have around the playground with respect to rules and whether it's designated for younger kids under 5 years old or 5 to 12 years old. The kind of protective surfacing that's acceptable is addressed by the law. Vegetation, related structures, which may include benches or shade screens, those sort of things that can be within the playground on the surface. If kids are running around and not paying such close attention, it's possible that they may run afoul of some of this stuff. Fences, which are often, they don't get replaced a real lot. And so you run into situations where a fence might be there because it's separating a parking lot from the playground. And during snow plowing operations, the fence may take a beating and have some sharp edges, things like that. So these sort of things are addressed. Paths and walkways, some of these have to do with ADA compliance. So again, the CPSC's Playground Public Safety Handbook is it was designed around that. The law for New York State and other states too was designed around that well-conceived document. So installations have to be done in accordance with the CPSC handbook. It's preferred that a contract with a playground manufacturer or their certified installer that from soup to nuts, it's all done by them. However, volunteer installation is common, it's perfectly fine, but it needs to be overseen by an approved supervisor that meets those criteria, a certified installer or somebody from the manufacturer. Inspections of your playground are really important because things change from sometimes from day to day, certainly from week to week. Weather changes things, unauthorized access after hours, that sort of thing. So it's a key compliance component with respect to the regulations. You should have an inspection checklist, and we can provide that as well. It's also contained within the CPSC's Playground Safety Handbook. Um, these documented inspections should be at least every week. But if it's during the playground season, and certainly if you're having a summer camp, kids are there every week or every day rather, you should be out there before those kids get there every day to see if it was visited at night by teenagers who may leave inappropriate things around. It is not, unfortunately, uncommon to find things like condoms, needles, other things, like beer cans and stuff like that, hanging around playgrounds. And some of these things are obviously a safety hazard. Others are just things we don't want our kids exposed to, right? So they should be documented on a checklist that is dated and signed and kept on file, so that if there is a claim brought against the municipality for an injury that occurred, you have some kind of documentation that shows you're doing your due diligence to make sure that that playground is maintained in a safe manner for the kids that are using it. So documented at least once a week. If you have to do a major repair, especially if this is a newer playground, you have a warranty on that playground for a certain amount of time. You want to be making sure that you're not just doing it really quickly out of convenience, but that you're contacting the manufacturer or their authorized representative to make sure that you're using the correct parts, that they're installed in the right way. And if a repair is needed and you can't get to that right away, you need to block that piece of equipment off effectively so that kids can't get at it. Now, that might mean, putting a piece of plywood over the access to a sliding pole or a bubble window that may have gotten broken or something through vandalism or whatever, a storm, a branch falling on it. And so with older playgrounds, you just want to really exercise. I mean, if the manufacturer can be contacted and you can get some advice on that, that's great. But there are better and worse ways to affect repairs when needed, even on an old playground that's out of warranty, and perhaps the manufacturer isn't around anymore, can't supply the parts because they don't stock them anymore because it's an old type of playground. But the original equipment is always recommended. Um, and it could void your warranty if it's under warranty and you do it incorrectly. So maintenance on your playgrounds, the function of maintenance, proper maintenance, is, of course, the safety of the kids that are using the playground, that it serve the function that it is intended to. So if an overhead ladder or something has a broken rung, it's not going to serve the purpose that it did. Or if a swing is broken, it's not going to be available to be used. And of course, good maintenance extends the life of the equipment that you spent a good bit of money on. We all know from shopping modern playground equipment that it is expensive stuff. It's expensive stuff because it was engineered and manufactured to specifications, and there's just no way that you can get off cheap, unfortunately, these days. And we do recommend against taking donated equipment and that maybe a school got rid of or something like that might be okay, depending on its age. Perhaps they closed down a building because of shrinking populations and there's a playground there, and something like that might be okay, but you need to be aware of donations. Okay. So you do maintenance to identify and replace broken or missing parts, to keep up with the kind of manufacturer's scheduled maintenance because parts loosen up. It's under sunshine, remember, and there's heat and cold, contraction and expansion. Connectors can become loosened or perhaps broken. Uh, the general condition and maintenance of the equipment is quite important. Housekeeping, you don't want detritus just all over the place. Sometimes, as I mentioned, beer cans or whatever, but it can be other kinds of garbage. You should always have a garbage receptacle that is regularly checked and emptied, so it's not just overflowing and things getting kicked around the playground there. So housekeeping is important. If you need to do a retrofit on an older piece of equipment that has become disabled for one reason or another, but it's salvageable. You have to be, cognizant of the right ways of going about that. You want to replace surfacing as it becomes displaced. Underneath slides, underneath swings, a lot of times the motion, the motion of the user knocks away the surfacing. So it's no longer there to protect somebody from a fall. You want to rate that back in. That's part of the maintenance. That's part of routine, regular maintenance. And you want to identify instances where vandalism may have compromised equipment or damaged it. So it prevents catastrophic failure, right? If you're on top of it and you're looking over your equipment, you're going to know when something is out of place. If you do it regularly, you'll recognize right away when something is changed and out of place. So if you're addressing these things as you notice them, they are less expensive than down the road when it becomes, a larger piece of it that might need to be replaced or addressed, and it prevents it from failing catastrophically if in fact a kid is using it, which would perhaps lead to injury, potentially a claim. um, so it identifies potential problems, obviously, and extends the life of your equipment. Some hazards to be aware of with respect to your equipment: pinch and crush points. There are moving parts to some pieces of equipment, like clatter bridges, those bridges that are suspended and kids walk over them and they kind of bounce along. That movement, and combined with the variations in temperature throughout the year and hardware that attaches these pieces becoming loosened, perhaps, the pieces shift in relation to each other. And so, whereas you might have had a nice parallel pair of boards that pose no problem because of the distance between them, if they shift, suddenly one side of that board might be closer. And if a kid is like crawling along it or something like that, and that space is narrowed down, and their finger goes in there and the bridge flexes, it creates a tremendous amount of force because of the multiplier effect of that large moving piece of equipment. So, that type of equipment is very important to take a look at and be critical of. And you never want to, and I've seen this out in the field, where somebody thought that, good intentions, they said, I'm going to contribute this to the municipality, and they built it themselves. And, that can vary tremendously. You might have a really skilled guy that might be able to do it, but I'll tell you, what I've seen has invariably been a dangerous piece of equipment that I've advised be removed from the playground. So other hazards: rings, S hooks, hard, heavy swings, inadequate spacing between equipment, exposed anchors, bolts, nails, and screws, the defects in the surfacing or sharp areas. We're going to see examples of all of that coming up. Right here is an example of a crush and pinch and crush point. You can see that there's a hinge here that allows those two pieces to move in conjunction with each other. Now, that movement can cause where that bolt is going through that connector, that black connector, and connects to the next piece. The movement alone over time elongates the metal because of fatigue. And so that can alter the dimensions, the distances, tolerances, and can create over time a problem that might translate into a pinch and crush point. However, you can see that this is a pretty solid piece of equipment that was well built and thought out. This, by contrast, is a homemade type thing where, I think I took this photo of one that I saw out in the field. It's just boards that, number one, will deteriorate over time. Okay. They may have been pressure treated, they may have been stained and all that sort of thing. But, it's easy for something like this to get out of whack and out of kilter and to create uneven spacing between those boards, and the dynamics, the physics that are involved is going to create an issue and a problem. So you don't want to have anything like that. Again, fatigue from movement, exposure to elements creates, sometimes breaks in equipment. Now, perhaps this isn't somewhere where a kid is likely to be accessing because it's not a ladder, it's just a support for a piece of equipment. But as most of us know, if it can happen, eventually it's probably going to happen. And so you want to identify things like this. For one thing, it's showing fatigue and potential failure down the road, and it could be and should be addressed. Now, when we talked about rings as a hazard, rings like this right now, there are specifications about how these are manufactured. Now, this is older, and you have S hooks involved and links in the chains that now they're hanging down a certain amount. The law requires now that they not be from the point of connection at the top to the top of the ring be longer than 7 inches. So something like this right here, and I know it's a little tough to see because of the trees in the background, but you can see where the arrows are pointing to the rings, and the distance down from the suspension or the horizontal bar is far greater than that. Now, these can get wrapped around a limb if they're moving around, and a kid is sort of swinging back and forth, like maybe you all remember when we were kids in gym, you had the traveling rings, right? So you can kind of pump them side to side and move around, and these actually create a bit of a hazard because of the movement, because of the length of the chain. S hooks, they are supposed to be closed to a point not greater than 1/8 of an inch. And this is obviously broader than that. And it can, under certain circumstances, become unhooked from its suspension point. And the increased movement, you can kind of see at the top, but you will see in this next slide, the increased movement allows for a greater amount of wear, and a lot of times that wear is taking place where you're not going to see it. Okay, it's at the top, it's maybe at an elevated point, and it's very difficult to see. But you need to get a ladder out and inspect this stuff periodically, and make sure that you're replacing these S hooks as they wear. This is worn nearly halfway through. And if a child is on a swing that's suspended by S hooks like this, and they're at the apogee of their swing, and something like that happens to break because of the stress on it, that can lead to injury, obviously. So again, these are kind of old, outdated equipment. We'll get into the suspension where that connector hooks to that horizontal bar. That's older stuff. These days, you will notice that if a swing is attached to that horizontal support bar at the top, it has a very smooth curve to it with nothing that can hang up a person. Believe it or not, one of the aspects of liability that we are counseled on when we take a playground safety inspector course, a certified playground safety inspector, that bit of hardware that's attached to the horizontal bar, if it has bolts sticking up, and some kid decides, well, this piece of equipment, I can get up there. I'll bet you I can get up on top of that. And he's scooting around, and then he says, well, I'm going to get down now. And he tries to get down, and if there's a bolt sticking up, it can catch on clothing and suspend them and potentially choke them out. How likely is that? Not very likely. But it is something that has happened, could happen. We don't want it to happen. And so you want to make sure you have hardware that you're using that is proper for the kind of regulations and laws and the knowledge that we have now of safe playgrounds. We in risk management deal with high frequency, high probability type of claims, things that happen a lot and they're likely to lead to injury. And then, and those injuries often are less severe because, slips on sidewalks happen a lot. The injuries can be severe, but typically are more like broken bones and such. But something like this would be a low frequency, high severity type of thing if it were to happen. And those high severity injuries are something we certainly want to avoid. Hard, heavy swings. Now, these sort of things, they look like fun and they used to be common, but if a child is walking past that or running past something like that because they're having a good time on the playground, they're not really paying attention, and somebody is on one of these things and swinging, it's a lot of weight and it's a hard surface that suddenly connects with that child and can cause significant injury. That's why you typically don't see swing seats that are made of wood anymore, because it's a hard object that with a little bit of momentum can cause injury. So you see those kind of straps. This type of equipment, if it's out there, should be removed because it's dangerous. Now, inadequate spacing. Here you have a climbing wall that is perhaps, it looks to be about 6 feet from the edge of the playground and the protective surfacing. And that's fine. 6 feet is the standard. If it's less than 6 feet, obviously they could fall into an area where it's not protected by the surfacing. They could perhaps connect with the border. That is a hard surface. And other pieces of equipment that have greater movement involved, like swings, have a much greater amount of space required around them of both protective surfacing and any kind of other equipment that can be placed adjacent to it. Now here, this is a landscape slide, it's called. And it's of a more modern variety than one we'll see shortly. So it looks like a fairly benign sort of structure, but where it ends is, you can see by that red bar, quite close to another piece of equipment. So a kid is coming down that slide, and they're going to exit that slide and perhaps collide with another user. That obviously is a slide that it's close to as well. On that left border, you can see that curve. That's one of those curved slides that goes around in a circle and exits. So you could have two kids exiting a slide at the same time and collide with each other. Now, exposed anchors. This is something that's really an item that we look at very critically. You can have concrete anchors, you can have metal anchors, but if they're not protected by the surfacing that is designed to provide cushion for a fall, you can be colliding with an edge, perhaps a bolt or something like that. But regardless, it's going to hurt. It could cause injury. You need to have those anchors for your equipment buried underneath adequate surfacing. Here's an example of a concrete mount for a piece of equipment that's exposed. We see this all the time. And you can see that, for adequate protective purposes, wood chips like you see here, or FIBAR, it's often called, manufactured wood chips that are designed to be of a certain dimension. They interlock, they provide ADA compliance, all kinds of good stuff. But you can see that from in between those two anchors, it's really scuffed out and it's just dirt there. So the rest of it, you can imagine, is not of adequate depth, which is typically about 8 inches. And so that's not going to provide an awful lot of, so we have surfacing deficiencies here as well as an exposed anchor, which is indicative of the surfacing deficiency. Here we have, exposed screws, edges, metal edges, sharp metal edges, perhaps some splintering of aged wood. But in the lower part of the board that is right above the blue part, you can see that rusted screw sticking out probably close to a ½ inch. And that can catch on a kid that's running around it and lacerate them. It can even provide, under the right circumstance, an impalement hazard. So, we wouldn't want anything like that happening. As things deteriorate, wood, of course, deteriorates. It's been a long time since this has been treated with any kind of paint or preservative. And of course, those additives, those means of maintaining your playground with paint and stain and all that, you need to be quite careful about what kind of thing you're applying to, because of the potential hazards that they represent. Used to be that wooden playgrounds were built with, of course, and they still are, um, treated lumber. That's and that treatment, they would take the treatment and force it through. They treat it by forcing it through the grain of the wood from the ends through it, and it used to contain arsenic. It would leach out. Kids would be exposed to that sort of thing. Uh, really old playgrounds, that was the case. Nowadays, not so much. The wood is treated differently too. Wooden playgrounds, though, they deteriorate. They take a lot of maintenance. They're not cheap. So the benefits that you may see from a little bit of cost savings are not typically worth it in our estimation. Now you can see in the left-hand lower part of that hole a nail sticking up. Also, you can see the head of the nail. So all of these things should be caught through routine, diligent inspection and addressed. Here we have no surfacing underneath a climber. So if a kid falls, the likelihood that he's going to break a long bone is fairly elevated. And of course, protective surfacing, first and foremost, is designed to protect against head trauma. You're always going to have long bone breakage because, to a certain extent, because kids fall. As I said, the equipment is designed to test them, to challenge them, and in so doing, there is a certain amount of risk inherent. But that's part of what makes the playground a fun place, a useful place, a place of learning, and but that's why protective surfacing exists. To minimize those long bone breaks, but also and mainly to prevent head trauma. So here, now remember I said that swings require a greater amount of distance around them from other equipment and protective surfacing. Now here, the protective surfacing really doesn't come out very far. The rule is that you see that red arrow that is from the supporting bar down to, the seat. It has to be twice that distance in front and in back of the swing. Has to be covered with protective surfacing because of the movement of the swing and where the kid might end up. Because of that movement, you need protective surfacing out quite a ways in front and in back of that swing. Okay, here we also have some unwanted vegetation that is serving to root the protective surfacing in place and diminish its protective capacity. We have inadequate surfacing here. The newer playground equipment indicates on its support posts where the surfacing should come up to. Now there's two possibilities here. One is that the surfacing truly isn't up to the standard that it should be. The other is that it was a bad installation, and that piece of equipment wasn't anchored into the ground deeply enough or firmly enough. So in most cases, it's the former, by the way. So sharp edges, as I said, sunlight has a way of really, working on any kind of playground equipment over time. And plastics are, a big part of playgrounds these days. And a thin plastic sheet like surrounds this bubble plate is a likely, it's likely going to be affected over time by the sun. And this is the kind of damage that occurs. You want to make sure that through inspection and maintenance, you are eliminating sharp edges like this. Here is a sharp edge created by perhaps some vandalism. You can see that somebody had taken a piece of plywood on the inside so that a child cannot access it through the transition platform that they would otherwise be standing on to get at it. This is an example of some obsolete equipment. Now, at first you go, and geez, how come, Well, basically, it's an impalement hazard. The handholds and the foot pegs should have big round discs on the end of them to prevent a puncture of a child's body, and particularly their head, if they were to stumble and fall against it. And here too, we have some other problems. It's too close to the border. So if a kid falls off, he's likely to hit that piece of wood. And of course, as most of you have noticed, there's no protective surfacing around this piece of equipment. So this is a problem in all manner of speaking. Another piece of very old equipment here. And one of the rules for climbers is that, they used to have, there used to be climbers that had all manner of bars throughout them that you could stand on and then get yourself up into the middle. And these days, you'll notice that they're likely to be just like a dome, so that if you fall from the highest part of it, you're not going to fall onto another set of metal bars, which can cause injury, obviously. You're going to fall to the surfacing below, which is also lacking here. There's no surfacing to speak of right here, right? So here's the steeds that are driving this carriage here, and they too have those same handholds that are a problem. They have exposed anchors. You can see as we're looking at it, that blue horse in the front has exposed concrete anchor under it. There's no surfacing here. It looks to me like the front of that piece might even be damaged and have been broken off in the past. This piece of equipment should not be present in this playground. Now, remember before when we looked at that long landscape slide, that curvy plastic slide? Well, here is one that is just rife with hazards, okay? For one thing, it's obviously quite long, okay? And another thing is, unlike plastic, with the sun beating down on this thing, it is gonna get really, really hot. If a child gets onto this thing and they're going for that whole distance of that ride, they are going to get severely burned. So there's just no way around that. And this is not a safe piece of equipment that should be there. And to top it all off, I mean, look at how long this thing is. And at the end of it, is there any protective surfacing? No, there's not. And where does it spill out to? You can see just below and to the right, there's an access to a storm drain there or something. So they could spill onto a hard piece of metal. Like I said, if you can imagine it happening, at some point it's going to happen. If you think that this sort of stuff is out there, you're seeing photos, most of these that I've taken when I've been out in the field, and some of my colleagues have contributed some of this, we see this stuff out there. And unfortunately, a lot of municipalities, we all know that, financial considerations are something that you struggle with. When it comes to playgrounds, though, it's better not to have equipment than to have really bad equipment. Here are some examples of the attaching hardware at the top of a swing that I was talking about, where if somebody gets up on top, it's not a smooth surface. The bolts can catch clothing and all that. We know it's a very low probability sort of thing. It's a dumb thing to get up there and be horsing around, but unfortunately, there's people that engage in that kind of behavior. We have to be responsible in recognizing that and preventing what we can prevent. So inspection points, bubble panels, those round clear panels like we saw, they can look out them and it's just kind of a cool feature, but they can fatigue, they can be vandalized. Chains wear, they become thinner, they can get tangled up. Climbers, the design of a climber that it has adequate surfacing underneath it. We want to check the connectors and fasteners are being checked for tightness, for lack of fatigue, that we're replacing them when necessary, and that we're replacing them with good non-degradable type of hardware. A lot of hardware that you could buy might fit, but it's going to rust and fail more rapidly than something that's, say, zinc coated or stainless. Graffiti can take all manner, but you want to get rid of it, because if you don't get rid of it, you're going to get more of it. You want to address it immediately. Housekeeping, meaning garbage all over the playground. Make sure that you have a garbage receptacle there, and that you're checking to make sure that there's not inappropriate things that are on the playground that you don't want the kids exposed to, seeing, playing with, being damaged by. Missing parts of playgrounds. We're going to see a couple of shots of that coming up too. Perimeter boards, railings, threads. We'll see this stuff. Vandalisms. Okay, here's a missing bubble panel altogether, so a kid can just get right out of there, and he may be exposed to an area that is of greater height than they should be falling from or dropping down to. That's why there's railings on the sides of the equipment as you're at height. A lot of times we see chains that are surrounded by this yellow rubber, and it looks great when it's new. You're saying, gosh, that's really nice to hold on to and such, but it disintegrates, it degrades. And what happens when it does is that water makes its way down into the rubber interior, and it stays down in there and acts as something that degrades what at the bottom where the movement is taking place, and you cannot see that degradation because of the rubber that's hiding it still. So it's not the greatest idea to employ these kind of chains. We can see here the extreme wear on this piece of rubber coated stuff when the rubber was cut away. Okay. Climbing nets, often they're bolstered, and inside the ropes there's metal cording to give it the kind of strength it needs to last. But if that cording has been, or the fabric around it has been worn away, then it can lead to something that those various threaded coils of metal can break. Now that they're exposed, they can have a sharp edge to them. They can fail. Connectors, we just want to make sure they're nice and tight. Here we have some fatigue going on. We would want to address that. It could be solved by a connector on the far side, a piece of hardware that just needs to be tightened up to snug that up. A broken plastic mount for the railing that's going along there. It looks to me like that railing could just push right out of that, and if a child were putting weight on it, it may fail and they may topple. Again, just checking that hardware is in good shape. You want to get up on a ladder when it's elevated like this and make sure that you're addressing what needs to be done. Hardware, just keeping it in good shape. Climbers, a lot of times you'll get pieces that eventually will fail. They get cracks in them, they break away, they expose the hardware. You should replace these pieces. Plastic slide like this, you don't see any obvious, wear here or anything like that. But again, sunlight, weather, hot, cold, it degrades over time. Plastic, it loosens up the connectors. You need to just make sure that you're staying on top of this. Fencing. Here at the top of the fence, you can see too that there's sharp edges where the fence is not finished off. If you're going to put in a fence around something, you want to have the top edge finished off so that it's curling back on itself and is a smooth top on that to prevent lacerations. Here you see where the cars are parked. You can see that it's right at the point of a parking lot. It gets plowed. You can see that the fence is in kind of rough shape, and those links will break and become sharp edges in themselves. You want to eliminate vegetation where, a lot of times it could be something like poison ivy or whatever, but nonetheless, it's sticking out. It doesn't belong there. It's unsightly. It's poor maintenance. Again, graffiti, you want to get rid of graffiti as soon as you see it. Housekeeping, this is just an example of just stuff that doesn't belong on a playground, right? You don't want it there. You don't know what that is either. So, it could be a hazardous substance. It could have been something that could be somewhat toxic and, and mixed with water, and you just don't know. Missing parts. Okay, here you have one part doing the job of two, and it's going to, where the one failed, the other's going to fail because it's got twice as much stress on it now. Here's another example of a missing bolt. And you'll note too that the threads on these to the left, those threads should not be sticking out of that nut by more than 1/8 of an inch. Okay, 1/8 of an inch. It can impale or lacerate. Now, this is typically where a border is surrounding the surfacing of a playground, and these spikes are designed to hold the border down, and they work up out of their proper seating really frequently. It's amazing how frequently we find them like this. You just got to knock them back down. That's part of what inspection and maintenance is about. It's a simple thing, one strike and it's down, but it will not catch on somebody's foot or work loose and not support the border anymore. Here, you used to have rebar that would secure these old wooden borders in place, and that can work up and become an impalement hazard. We see this quite frequently. Here, too, you can have some exposed rebar, nails, whatever, splintering. You want to replace things when they become worn. Now, railings, you want to give them good shape, make sure that they're nice and tight, that the hardware is tight. But railings, you'll notice too that they're there for a reason. Railings you see the vertical bars on these railings are closer together when you get higher up, because there's a greater chance of injury from because of a fall from height, and we don't want that to occur. Here's another example of long threads. Another example of an impalement hazard at the end of this arrow here. Now, trip and fall hazards. A lot of playgrounds we see with these impact mats, they're called. And the impact mats, it's a good device, but it's a mistake to put it on top of the surfacing because they curl. They are also affected by the sun. They curl up at the edges. They stick up in general, and they are a trip and fall hazard. Or as the kid's swinging, he catches his foot on it, he might fall off the swing, something like that. I like to see these impact mats used underneath the surfacing. So you bury it under the surfacing so that in a high use area, a lot of movements taking place, the surface gets displaced, but only to a certain extent because you have that impact mat down below what's getting displaced. So it provides a certain level of protection regardless. But that's the way to use it, is not on top, but down, but buried underneath. Here you have some vandalism, parts removed. You want to just make sure that you're taking care of this. Again, vandalism, it's been properly blocked off by that piece of plywood. Here you have some, somebody took a saw to that link. That is the only way that that link could have those grooves in it. Okay, it's unique to that one link. Again, wood, it can burn. Other things can burn too, but you can see the vandalism here. Peeling up of poured in place rubber. We're going to get into, and I know we're coming up close to the end of the hour here. I'm not quite sure how far okay, we've got a little ways to go. So some more incidents of vandalism. Various deficiencies. This climbing wall has some kind of a cable running across supporting. It was an after. It was something that was added afterwards, okay, to tighten up and keep something together. It doesn't belong there. It should have been taken out of use. Here's a piece that was displaced. Now, some solutions. If a part fails, you have to be careful about how you replace it. But here, it was replaced with a very smooth, very solid piece that has no sharp edges or anything like that. Another example of the same sort of repair. So that's a good repair. You don't want to put just like a piece of wood there that's going to splinter and everything down the road. Okay, underneath seesaws, you want to have tires buried to absorb impact, and that's an important thing. A tailbone or a spinal injury, those sort of injuries have happened in the past. This minimizes the chance of it because you're not going all the way down to the ground. There is a chance for a child to, their legs are going to come in contact, and even if they're not quite strong enough, that's going to provide the extra cushion. Surfacing, drainage issues are quite important. For one thing, if it's cold out and that freezes, that kid's going to just take a ride right off of that slide. But also, it degrades the surfacing. It creates things like mold. There's different kinds of surface materials that have been traditionally used: wood chips, pea gravel, sand, rubber. Okay, there's benefits and drawbacks to each of these. Now, wood chips, it's the benefits are it doesn't cost a lot. You can order it in and put a big pile down and move it to where it's needed to go. And it's very easy to do. And so it's easy to put in, it's less abrasive. Animals aren't attracted to it. It's ADA compliant. So the way it locks together these days, this manufactured fiber, kids can wheel a wheelchair over it and such. It's got good drainage, and it's pretty attractive. It looks nice. But it does decompose over time. And so you do need to kind of replace it every once in a while. It's throwable, but it can be combustible. It could be a little slippery when wet. It needs a good substrate. In other words, underneath it, you need to put some kind of weed barrier or whatever. It can conceal debris, but typically that's not such an issue. Stolen for gardens, that's a joke. Come on. If somebody's doing that, I don't see that happening too often. You do need to, it does migrate though, away from like swings and slides and stuff. So you do have to move it back into place. And you shouldn't be using it on concrete or anything like that. Okay, you don't put a playground over concrete. It can develop some slime mold, but that doesn't happen a real lot. Pea gravel is cheap. You can dump it in, spread it around. Doesn't disintegrate. It's not attractive to animals or microbes. It's not combustible and it drains well. Problem is, it's tough to walk on. It's throwable. It moves around a lot. Okay, so it spreads and those areas at the bottom of the slide or a swing, it moves away from them a lot. It's a lot of maintenance and it's not ADA accessible. So if you have a playground, you're putting in a playground, it's a poor choice because of that. These days, there are ADA compliant regulations you have to observe. So sand also, it's cheap and stuff. not subject to vandalism or microbe growth. It's easy to buy, but when it gets wet, it gets really hard. It can compress, it freezes easily, it scatters around, it's attractive to animals. If a kid runs in to go to the bathroom or something in your facility, and they've got it on their shoes, it wrecks your floors. Let's see. This is rubber. Okay, yeah, it's very low maintenance. Okay, that poured in place rubber, a lot of facilities have gone to it. A lot of schools have gone to it. Really easy to clean up. Water just runs right off it. You can use it over concrete. You can establish a playground over an old parking lot or something like that. When you have poured in place this rubberized material, and you have adequate distance between the equipment and the edge of that protective material. So it's very resilient. It doesn't scatter around. It's ADA accessible. It's grips your foot so kids don't slip on it and stuff. It can be, you need level ground. It can be burned, okay, melted. It can be curled and separated at the edges, subject to vandalism, because it can be either peeled up or cut away or whatever. And it's pretty costly to put in, but it's good stuff. The other the other problem with it too is that it gets pretty hot in the summer. A lot of times, if it's black or dark green, which it often is, it gets pretty warm. So ADA changes, they took place like almost 10 years ago and such. And the philosophy is you want to include kids with the sort of activities that playgrounds offer. So, you have to have at least one accessible route into a ground level play component. Okay, so we'll see that in a moment. It has to be, and the surfacing around it has to be compliant, as all surfacing does. So the kind of equipment and its corresponding experience for those who are physically disadvantaged. You can have spring rockers, which provide the rocking sort of sensation, and there are swings that are designed for them to access, to have swinging experience, climbing, spinning, sliding. All of these sort of pieces of equipment are designed for ADA, and also they can access, in many cases, the equipment that all the other kids use, which is great because you want them to have that social experience too. It's very, very important. If you have designated equipment for physically disadvantaged kids, you do not want to isolate it away from the other kids. It only creates a sense of isolation and separation from them, and is really a not the way to go. So here's an example of something that is ADA compliant, a pathway that's leading into a playground from a park. You can see the surface around it is pea gravel apparently, and that's not particularly accessible. So that kid may be those kids may be just going over to equipment that is designed for their access. So here's one way around the border that allows them to enter the playground. Okay, a little ramp, some other kinds of socializing and play equipment that they can access. Okay, but they can also very frequently get right on over to a playground, park their wheelchair, and just shimmy up transition platforms and get up at height and do things that other kids can do also, but they have to be able to get there. So here we are at the 1 hour mark, and we just managed to complete. Now, you can see my email there. I welcome any kind of questions or comments or anything of that nature. Any kind of challenges you're experiencing. I've been inspecting playgrounds for well over 10 years now, and I've gone through the CPSI program. Becoming a certified playground safety inspector is a good idea if you have a number of parks, a large selection of playgrounds, and the New York State Recreation and Park Society they sponsor courses. You can look them up, NYS, RPS, and So we have one question up here that I'm going to take a look at. Um, okay, if a chain on a swing is starting to show some rust, should it be changed right away? If it's showing rust, chances are it's not the right kind of chain to be used on a swing. Um, so you should be replacing that with something that's stainless. Where can we download the checklist from? If anybody wants to email me, I will email you back some sample checklists. And also the Consumer Product Safety Commission's website, the CPSC website, has the Playground Safety Handbook on it. And within the handbook, there is a very good checklist. You can also Google playground checklists. There's many ways to get at that, but I'm more than happy to supply what NYMER uses. And again, to answer any questions, unfortunately, this, often we make the PowerPoint available, but this PowerPoint is too large with too many photos to email. But again, this presentation is being recorded right now. And so you should be able to access it by going to nymer.org and going to our recorded webinars. It'll be ready in another couple of weeks. So let's see, I think we have one more question here. Oh, no, you're quite welcome, John. Okay, so that brings us to the conclusion of today's presentation. I really appreciate everyone joining us. I hope you all have a really fun and productive summer that is much more akin to those in the past that we've all enjoyed. And so be safe and thank you for joining me. Take care.